Okay, greetings to key definitions, key terms of the business management IBDP. Today's key term is limited liability. Okay, we're going to focus on liability first. It's not a particular commonly used word. In the normal English language on a day-to-day basis, people don't really use the word liability. In fact, if you ever do hear it, it'll be within the context of criticizing someone for not performing particularly well. Okay, a football coach might pick on a player who hasn't performed very well and say he's a liability to the team. He's not performing particularly well. But that's what it means in kind of the normal English language. But we don't. It's not a common word. In business, it means something slightly different. It's also negative, but it means debts. If you want one synonym, that's it. It's a debt. Okay. You can think of it as costs you haven't yet paid, but are committed to. You're legally committed to paying them. Okay, it's not a liability. If you just plan that maybe I might buy a new machine in 2 months' time, that's not a liability because you're not committed to it. But costs that you are committed to but haven't yet paid. Okay, you might be committed to it because it's a series of installments that you have to pay on a loan. You took out a loan, you paid back over 12 months and you've paid off 6, and those are costs because you've already paid them. But the remaining 6 are liabilities because you're legally committed to pay them. Right? It might be credit. You've taken supplies on credit from a supplier and you've used those supplies and you've signed a contract and you're legally obliged to pay those costs. So they become liabilities. Costs means I've already paid them. It's like a future cost. But importantly, it's a future cost that you are legally committed to. Right. Strong links here with Unit 3, with balance sheet and external source of finance. Most of the external source of finance will become liabilities. You borrow money and you are legally committed to pay it back. You borrow an asset, you use an asset, you're legally committed to pay for it. Whatever that might be, okay? But there's definitely external source of finance, overdraft. You're legally committed to repay that overdraft. Balance sheet, you'll find balance sheet, the top half of a balance sheet is made up of assets and liabilities. Right? Assets are positive, what you own. Liabilities are negative, in a way, what you owe. Long-term liabilities and current liabilities. All right. So it's about debts. There is also kind of a major liability, a major issue for some firms on lawsuits. There's been an accident, a customer got injured in your store, or they got poisoned by something you fed them, or whatever it might be. And the courts have decided that, yes, it was your fault, you are liable, you need to pay compensation. And that's another quite common, certainly in case studies, it's quite a common form of liabilities. It's a debt that you're committed to. Remember, debt is only bad if you cannot pay it. It's just a little key point I want to flag up there. If you look at external source of finance, a lot of loans are taken out by firms who are wanting to expand. These are positive firms who've had a good set of results and they're in a good position. And they take out this external source of finance. They create these liabilities because they believe they can pay them back. Okay, so it's only bad if you can't pay it back. Which brings us to the issue of limited liability. What if you cannot pay it back? Essentially, you go into receivership or liquidation. There's different terms here for this process. But what it is the courts or your debtors, they will come into your firm and they will take your assets. They will take your machine. If you've got stock, they will take your stock. They will take whatever capital, building, and it'll be sold off. And then the money made from selling them off will be given to your debtors because they owe. You owe them, you are legally committed to them, and if it means your firm goes bust, then so be it. But you have got to honor your debts, you've got to pay off your liabilities. So if you cannot pay, your firm could go into liquidation, receivership, and shut down. Okay, so here's where we talk about limited liability. The opposite of limited liability is unlimited liability. Okay, so you get your sole traders and your partnerships. Now I've got Joe, the human being, the baker, the person, and I got Joe Bakers, the business. And now put them together because they have unlimited liability, and in the eyes of the law, they are one and the same. An asset that belongs to Joe belongs to the business. It's the same. Whether it is a oven from the bakery or the oven in Joe's house, it's one and the same. They have unlimited liability. The law sees them as one single entity. Whereas PLC and LTD, no, it's different. They have separate legal identity. Okay, Joe's oven in her house, her bed, her TV, her wedding ring, whatever it might be, those are her personal assets. And then separate from that, you have the business. And now we're talking about stocks, and we're talking about ovens, and we're talking about decorations, and we're talking about, I don't know, if they've got a little restaurant, we're talking about the chairs and the tables, if they own the building, then the building. But they're separate. Okay? And now you're going to see how that matters when we come to the next slide to show our definition. So here is Joe, the sole trader partnership. Here's Joe PLC. So they will have unlimited liability. Okay, and they'll have limited liability. So they owe, in both scenarios, the same numbers, right? She's got a sofa set 5,000, sofa set 5,000, ovens 25, building 80, ovens 25, building 80. There's a slight difference here because it's a PLC, so they've got to have shares, they've got to have sold shares or LTD. So she has invested, in order to be an owner, she has bought shares. So Joe has bought 10,000 worth of shares. Okay, but again, the debt is the same. The liability is the same. Both of these businesses have created liabilities that they're legally obliged to pay of 110,000. Okay, now here's the difference. The debtors, the people you owe money to, they can take your building, 80,000. They can take the ovens, 105,000. And they can come and take Joe's personal assets of her sofa to make 110,000. You can take all of those because it's all the same. You connected. Those assets are all one and the same. But with a company, PLC and LTD, no. Joe's sofa set is out of bounds. That belongs to Joe. The debt was with the firm, not with Joe. So the debtors can take the building, yeah, fine, 80,000. They can take the ovens, 105,000. But they cannot take Joe's because it's limited. They separate. Okay. Now, often people understand that. And then when the definition comes up, it seems to be a little bit confusing. So how does the definition link to that? So here's the last part where people often get confused. This is what Joe cannot do. Joe of Joe's Bakers, when we're talking about the PLC here, she can't see the problems coming and try retrieve her 10,000. Okay? Remember, she's invested 10,000. She can't try get her 10,000 out. She can't quickly go sell the oven before the debtors come, sell the oven and take her 10,000 out. She can't do that. Okay? Her debt is lost. Her responsibility for the company's debts is limited to the 10,000 that she put in. Right? They've taken her 10,000 and wherever that 10,000 was, maybe she used it to contribute towards the oven. She cannot retrieve her 10,000. She leaves her 10,000 and her responsibility is limited to that 10,000. That 10,000 belongs to the debtors. Okay? Her sofa is safe, but her 10,000 investment is lost. So here we get the definition. All right, so I hope this makes sense. Now, when you see the definition, limited liability is where the business owner is only liable, only responsible for their original investment should the business fall into debt. All right, so her 10,000 is lost. She's responsible for leaving it in the business so that the debtors can go and collect the assets. The business and the owner have separate legal identities. So she's safe. Her personal assets are safe. They cannot come and take her personal assets. Unlimited liability is if a business has debts, the owner must pay even if this means selling their own possessions, even if it means selling the sofa. And you get that with sole traders and partnerships. Okay, so I hope that tells you what limited liability is.